The first thing Armand noticed wasn't the blood. It was the way her hands were trembling, like she was still holding on to something she had just lost. She stood at the edge of the small daycare doorway, breath uneven, scrubs wrinkled and streaked with dark, drying stains that didn't belong in a place filled with bright drawings and tiny laughter. The room fell silent for a second, the kind of silence that only comes when something heavy enters a light space. Armand froze mid-step, his little daughter Meher clinging to his leg, her tiny fingers tightening instinctively as if she sensed something was wrong. The other parents stared, some whispering, some pulling their children closer. But Armand didn't move. He just looked at the woman, really looked at her, and something inside him shifted. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, subscribe to Heartfelt Stories. Because sometimes the smallest act of compassion can change everything. The woman took a hesitant step forward, her voice barely above a whisper as she apologized to no one in particular. Her name was Dr. Syra Nadim, though no one in that moment cared about titles. To them, she was just a stranger who looked like trouble had followed her in. But Armand saw something else. He saw exhaustion that ran deeper than sleep could fix. He saw grief hiding behind professionalism. And he saw someone trying very hard not to fall apart in front of strangers. Daylight streamed through the windows, casting soft patterns on the floor, a stark contrast to the storm she seemed to carry within her. It was a bright morning, the kind that promised normalcy. But for Syra, normal had shattered hours ago. Armand adjusted the strap of his worn-out bag on his shoulder. He had been late too, rushing between 2 jobs just to keep his life from collapsing. Being a single father hadn't been part of his plan, but plans didn't matter much anymore. What mattered was Meher, her smile, her future, and making sure she never felt the absence that haunted him every day. He knew what it felt like to walk into a room, carrying something no one else could see. The daycare manager approached Syra with visible concern, her polite tone struggling to mask discomfort. There were rules, after all: cleanliness, safety, presentation. Words like those often push people like Syra away in moments like this. But before the manager could say anything that might break her completely, Armand stepped forward. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just a simple step. But it changed the direction of everything. He reached into his bag and pulled out a faded scarf, one he usually kept for Meher in case the weather turned. Without hesitation, he held it out to Syra. She looked at him, confused at first, then hesitant, as if unsure whether she deserved the gesture. Her hands hovered before finally accepting it, her fingers brushing against his briefly, cold and shaking. Armand didn't ask questions. He didn't stare at the blood. He didn't make her explain herself. He just nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that said, "You're safe here." That small moment unraveled something inside Syra. Just hours earlier, she had been in the emergency room, fighting to save a life that slipped through her fingers despite everything she gave. The sound of the flatline still echoed in her ears, the weight of failure pressing against her chest like a stone she couldn't lift. She hadn't even realized she was still wearing those scrubs when she rushed out, late to pick up her nephew, the only family she had left after losing her sister years ago. Life hadn't given her time to process grief. It had simply handed her responsibilities and expected her to keep moving. And now here she was, standing in a daycare, feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. But Armand's reaction didn't match the judgment she had prepared herself for. Instead, it gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: understanding. The manager softened her stance, perhaps influenced by Armand's calm presence, and gently guided Syra to sit down, offering water and a moment to breathe. The tension in the room eased, conversations resumed, and the world, in its usual way, kept moving. But for Syra, time slowed. She sat there, clutching the scarf, her thoughts unraveling. She watched Armand as he knelt to adjust Meher's tiny shoes, his movements careful, patient, filled with a quiet kind of love that didn't need words. There was something about him that felt steady. Over the next few days, their paths crossed again and again, always in the soft glow of morning daylight. Syra started arriving earlier, her scrubs clean, her posture composed, but the weight in her eyes remained. Armand noticed. He always noticed. And slowly, Without forcing anything, a silent understanding grew between them. Syra learned about Armand's life in fragments. How he worked 2 jobs. How he cooked simple meals every night. How he braided Meher's hair with clumsy fingers but unwavering dedication. How he never complained, even when exhaustion etched itself into every line of his face. Armand learned about Syra's world too. The long shifts, the impossible choices, the moments that broke her, and the ones that kept her going. They never had long conversations, just small exchanges, a shared smile, a quiet nod. Sometimes that was enough. But the real change came one afternoon. Meher had fallen while playing, her tiny knee scraped and bleeding. She cried, her small world shaken by pain. Armand rushed to her, panic flashing across his face, his hands unsure what to do first. And then Syra stepped in. Her movements were quick, precise, but gentle. She cleaned the wound, her voice soft and reassuring, calming Meher with a warmth that seemed to come naturally despite everything she carried. Armand watched, something shifting deep within him. He realized then that Syra wasn't just someone surviving her pain. She was someone who turned it into care for others. That realization changed the way he saw her. And maybe, just maybe, it changed the way she saw herself too. Days turned into weeks, and the heaviness between them slowly transformed into something lighter. Not perfect, not complete, but hopeful. Syra started smiling more. Armand started feeling less alone. And in the middle of their imperfect lives, something beautiful began to grow. But healing isn't always linear. One morning, Syra didn't show up. Then another day passed. And another. Armand felt a quiet worry settle in his chest. He didn't have her number. He didn't know where she lived. All he had were those brief moments they shared. And suddenly, they felt too fragile. Until one afternoon, she returned. She looked different. Not broken, not lost, but stronger. She walked in with steady steps, her eyes clearer, her shoulders no longer carrying the same invisible weight. When she saw Armand, she smiled, and this time, it reached her eyes. She had taken time off. She had faced the grief she'd been running from. She had allowed herself to feel, to break, and to begin again. And somehow, in that process, she had found her way back to herself. Armand didn't ask for details. He didn't need them, because sometimes the fact that someone comes back is enough of a story. As the sun streamed through the windows once again, casting warmth across the room, Syra handed back the scarf he had given her that day. But Armand shook his head. He told her to keep it, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of the moment she chose to keep going. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment to share, and comment. Your support helps stories like this reach people who need them the most. And before we end, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where a stranger's kindness changed your life? Because sometimes it's not the grand gestures that save us. It's the quiet ones. The ones that come when we least expect them. The ones that remind us we're not alone. And in a world that often moves too fast to notice pain, people like Armand and Syra remind us of something simple yet powerful. Kindness still exists, and sometimes it shows up right on time, even if it arrives in blood-stained scrubs.